when I was a student, the first book I ever wrote on food was a textbook which I wrote in my 20s called Microbiology and Food. I wasn't satisfied with the way the subject was taught in universities, and rather merely than moan, I thought it would be a good idea to do a textbook that looked at it differently. That was in the 70s, and then in the 80s the food book came out, which followed my television series on Channel 4, which was called Food for Thought. In the 90s I wrote the book about BSE, and then at the turn of the century edited a book on GM crops. And then more recently The Future of Food, which has been picked up, hasn't been translated into French. The French are quite special, are they not, about their food and their notions of what people should properly eat. But that has come out in Lithuanian there and in Italian. It's also been more recently published in German and in Spanish. So I've written a lot of books about food over the years, and curiously I'm talking about a new one at the moment, so there may be yet another one in a year or two's time. But a lot depends on what you call food. Now, quiche Lorraine gave rise to that saying, real men don't eat quiche. The notion that a quiche is pansy food, slightly limp-wristed, you know, real butch men don't eat quiche. But quiche Lorraine is almost the hallmark of a health food restaurant. I guarantee that on every menu of every health food restaurant in the world, there is at least quiche, no matter how they change the other things around. But compare quiche with a bacon and egg flan. Now, a flan is a very old-fashioned, almost Edwardian, rather working sort of a meal, which no right-thinking person would want in the modern era. It's outdated. A flan just sounds old-fashioned. It dates from the 40s and 50s. Now, some years ago, when Jimmy Young in England was doing his morning radio show, a great show, I thought, I gave a lecture on this subject, and it was picked up by all the press. We had 20 minutes about it on Jimmy Young's programme, and it was in all of the daily papers, because I pointed out that the quiche is in fact the same as the bacon and egg flan. It's just that the name is different. Incidentally, it's nothing much like the quiche that you buy if you go to Lorraine in France, but that's neither here nor there. And what's even more interesting, this was at the time when the British people were being enjoined never to have a fryer. A fryer, it wasn't quite a death sentence, but it was the next best thing. The one thing everybody should avoid was a fryer. But what I pointed out in my lecture was that the ingredients of the fryer are identical to the ingredients of the quiche. The egg is the same, except that it's in the filling of the quiche, whereas it's just an egg on the plate in the fryer. The fat is the same, except that the fat in the quiche is present in the pastry casing, whereas in the fry-up it coats the food. The bacon is there, except that it's in the form of a rasher in the fryer, and it's chopped up and cooked inside the quiche. But essentially, the ingredients of fat and carbohydrate, of flour and egg and bacon, the ingredients of the quiche are virtually identical to the ingredients of a flan. And both are virtually identical to the ingredients of the fried breakfast we're being told not to eat. So isn't that an interesting paradox, ladies and gentlemen, that if you have these things spread out on a plate, they're dangerous, and only an idiot would ever sully their insides with his potentially life-threatening mélange of food. Whereas if you mix them together and put them in a rather posy little presentation and serve them as a slice on a plate, then the same ingredients become socially acceptable and indeed highly, highly healthy. So remember that there is an awful lot in the way in which we talk about food. Now, there are a great many misunderstandings in the teaching of nutritional science. And here's another one. The fact that children eat what they're brought up to eat. Children eat the same as their parents eat. We know that isn't true. When I was a little boy, my parents sometimes made curries because I had an uncle who'd been in colonial India. And the neighbours used to say, oh, that smelly stuff, that's foreign rubbish, the Fords are cooking again. What on earth is it? Indian, I think. It was regarded as an extremely strange thing to have. Nowadays, it's the normal thing for any British lad going out on a Friday night to go and have a curry. Oriental meals. Vietnamese and Japanese are very popular in America, just as Chinese are very popular in Britain. And it's the normal thing to go out with your mates and have a Korean or a Vietnamese or a Chinese meal. A generation or two ago, it was unthought of. The whole notion of sweet and sour flavours being combined, which we all accept and our children accept, was unheard of in the West. in the 1950s. Look at pizzas. Everywhere you look, there is pizza on sale. There's always a pizzeria on a liner like this, or a cruise ship. Wherever you look, there are pizzas. Pizzas are perfectly normal, but I know the man who brought pizza to Britain, Peter Boiso, who was the chairman, the founder of Pizza Express, and he said how in the late 40s, I think 1948, he was in Dover Street in Soho with a little tiny cafe that he'd just rented, trying to get Londoners to taste a piece of quiche. He was giving away little pizzas that he'd made. And the people were saying to him, well, I don't think you're going to sell that, mate. That's just cheese on bloody toast. There's nothing more about that, mate. Make that at home. And nobody was interested. They had to do everything they could possibly think of to encourage people to come and eat in his restaurant. It was unheard of. Nowadays, it's absolutely everywhere. And now you don't only have traditional pizzas, but pizzas with baked beans on them, and pineapple pizzas. The most peculiar things that you could possibly imagine.